Hey there! In this video, we'll take a look at the low light or high ISO performance of the Canon R5 Mark II. We'll first start off by taking a look at a few real-life examples on the R5 II, and then we'll do some lab testing with the R5 II against the R5C. And we'll also determine if there is an informal second base ISO of the R5 Mark II. So we'll start off here with a few shots that I captured when I was on my trip to Alaska. These are shot at Valdez at night, and all these shots were with using the R5 II in C-Log 2 with the in-camera noise reduction set to auto. That's the default setting. We will talk more about the noise reduction settings in these two cameras a little bit later. So first we'll take a look at the images right out of camera, then look at them graded, and then look at them graded with some noise reduction added in post. So here's the first example. This is at ISO 4000, and this is ungraded right out of camera so you can see the exposure. This is after the image is graded. I think it looks pretty clean. And this is with the image graded and a little bit of noise reduction. It cleans up just a little bit more. Here's the second example. This is right out of camera, ungraded. This is the image after the grading. Again, I think it looks really clean. And then let's look at it after a little bit of noise reduction. And I think it looks really, really nice. Again, pretty clean. Then I wanted to look up at a higher ISO. This is at 12,800, right out of camera. This is after grading. Again, you can start to see some noise here, up a lot higher in the ISO range. And here it is after some noise reduction, but overall pretty good. Next, let's take a look at a quick ISO ramp for one of those scenes. And for this, I increased the ISO by 1/3 of a stop each time, but I also increased the shutter speed by 1/3 of a stop for each one. And this is so we can maintain the same exposure, so you can just compare the noise performance throughout the ISO range. So I'll start off at 4000 and I'll show you the image right out of camera, and then we'll take a look at the graded image as I increase the ISO, but maintaining the same exposure. So here it is right out of camera to get a sense of the exposure. This is ISO 4000. Here's the same shot, same ISO, but graded. And as we step up through the ISO range, you'll start to see the noise increase. Of course, here it is at 6400. I think that the camera does a pretty good job in this middle ISO range. You definitely start to see some noise showing up in the darker areas, specifically at ISO 10,000, 12,800. You know, it does hold together pretty well. I think it holds a lot of the color. But as you'd expect, up in the super high ISO range, you are definitely introducing quite a bit of noise. Here it is at 20,000 and 25,600, just so you can see. So before we get into the nerdy lab testing and comparing the R5 II with the R5C, I do want to take a moment to talk about some misconceptions about low light performance and how to test for it. When you test a sensor in its higher ISO range, you still need to get proper exposure. I think a lot of people go out and think of low light performance as shooting in a really dark environment and then just raising the exposure in post. Those are situations where you are underexposing the image. So to technically test a sensor, it should be properly exposed with lighting, aperture, and shutter speed at a given ISO. And while we're doing this test, we're going to be looking at noise performance, image quality, colors, etc. at the higher ISOs. Now, to get proper exposure, I use a gray card and false color in both of these cameras. And then as I increase the ISO in the camera, I also increase the shutter speed to maintain a proper exposure. I then bring in post and I grade them by hand and try to get them to match as closely as possible. I do this in terms of contrast and saturation. I don't try to match them in terms of colors, but that way we can just take a look and see how the cameras compare against each other. Now, we also need to talk about noise reduction. Both of these cameras have noise reduction in the cameras, and they have settings to control it. We'll first look at the noise reduction settings set to their default settings. Now, both of these can be found under the custom picture settings, which will be C-Log 3 in the R5C and of course C-Log 2 in the R5 II. Now, both of these, the noise reduction is set to auto by default, but you can go in and change those, and I will a little bit later to talk about what happens when the noise reduction is turned off in the cameras. But I think a good thing to look at first is the noise reduction settings set to default. I have made videos comparing the noise reduction in the R5C and my settings that I recommend. I'll leave that video linked down below. Starting off here with the R5 II versus the R5C with its default noise reduction settings set to auto. Now, I always record all of the ISOs when I do these tests just to see if I can find anything else interesting, and I will show them all here so they can be documented on YouTube. Starting off in the lower ISO range, the R5 II looks just a little bit cleaner here. Now remember, the R5C has a dual base ISO and the second base at 3200, so we'll see that kick in right here, and the R5C cleans up. Now pay attention to the R5 II here at 4000, which it seems to clean up at 4000. Now the R5 II does not have a formal dual base ISO, but we'll look into that more throughout this video. Now, as we get into the higher ISO range, the luminoise, I think, looks very similar between the two cameras, but the chroma noise looks worse on the R5 II. Now, this might have to do with the in-camera noise reduction in the R5C being different than the R5 II, so I will take a look at with the noise reduction setting turned off. Also, I see a little bit of a color shift on the R5 II as we get really high up in the ISO range, and you can see this specifically in my skin tones. Now let's look at both of these cameras compared against each other with the noise reduction settings turned off in the cameras. Now in the lower ISO range, I think they both look really clean. Maybe the R5 II looking just a little bit cleaner with a little bit less noise, but both of them look really good. So let's keep in mind the ISOs of 3200 and 4000, again, like we saw before. So take a look at the R5C when it hits 3200 right here, it cleans up. And then take a look at the R5 II hitting 4000, it cleans up here. Now, above 4000, I would say that the luminoise looks pretty similar. The chroma noise is more visible on the R5C here without the in-camera noise reduction, so the noise reduction in the camera is definitely taking care of quite a bit of that chroma noise. I'd say the chroma noise between the two cameras is a little bit closer and still just a little bit better on the R5C, but they are closer than they were with the noise reduction turned on. And you definitely see that color shift again on the R5 II. Like I said, you can definitely see it in the skin. But overall, I think they're fairly similar and a lot closer with the noise reduction off. Next, let's talk about dual base ISOs on these two cameras. Now, Canon does not list any of their non-cinema cameras as having a dual base ISO, but we often see them having an informal base ISO. So like I said, the R5C formally does have dual base ISO of 800 and 3200 when shooting in log or raw, and the R5 II only has one base ISO of 800. Now, we did see the camera cleaning up at 4000 on the R5 II, so what I wanted to do was another test just to verify this. So what I did was I just put the body cap on the camera and recorded it at different ISOs so we could take a look at the noise. So starting off at ISO 2000, just take a look at the noise here, and as you increase the ISO, you should see an increase of noise. So you see that from 2500 to 3200, but look at 4000, there's definitely a cleaning up going on there and you see less noise. And then you start to see the noise increase at 5000 and 6400. Just as you would expect, when you're increasing the ISO, you will increase the noise that is recorded. But at 4000, there is some cleaning up and then the noise continues to increase after that point. So like I said, the R5 II is not listed as having a dual base ISO, but I'll call it an informal second base ISO at 4000. So overall, the low light or high ISO performance of the R5 II, in my opinion, is pretty similar to the R5C. Now, it's decent, but not amazing at the super high ISOs. Your mileage may vary at those ISOs because you can always add some noise reduction in post. But I think they perform really solid in that middle ISO range of 4000 on the R5 II and 3200 on the R5C. I shoot a lot of stuff on the R5C at 3200, and I have shot some stuff at ISO 4000 on the R5 II, and it cleans up really nicely. It's also good to see how clean the base ISO of 800 is on the R5 II. Well, hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please consider hitting subscribe down below. It would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.